If you've been anywhere near knitting spaces lately, you've probably seen this red hat. It's been showing up on pattern platforms, across social media, on TikTok, and several versions of this hat are sitting at the very top of Ravelry's Hot Right Now list. And every time it appears, it seems to spark conversation. Not about the pattern itself, but about what it's supposed to mean. Hi, my name is Taylor, and today I want to walk through a knitting pattern with a very specific historical background, why it's showing up right now, and why people are responding to it in very different ways. On a practical level, the hat itself is pretty simple. It's a red knitted toque, straightforward construction, quick to knit, easy to modify. And part of why it spread so quickly is because it's accessible. You don't need advanced skills to knit one, and it doesn't take a lot of time to participate. The pattern most people are referring to is often called the melt the ice hat. What's really being discussed isn't the pattern itself, but what the hat represents. The attention it's getting is about what the hat is referencing. The slogan points to the US Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, often referred to as ICE, which has been part of a lot of public discussion in the United States in recent years. And the color and the style of the hat aren't accidental either. They're pulling from a much older symbol. The red hat being referenced here has a very specific historical origin. During World War II, Norway was occupied by Nazi Germany. Open resistance was dangerous and often impossible, but people still found ways to signal dissent quietly, indirectly, and through everyday objects. One of those objects was a red knitted hat. Long before the war, red hats were already culturally meaningful in Norway. They were associated with the Nisse, a folkloric figure tied to home life, protection, and tradition. Over time, the hat became the marker of Norwegian cultural identity, and during the occupation, that familiarity became its power. In the early 1940s, Christmas cards featuring a red-hatted gnome circulated as subtle expressions of Norwegian identity. Those cards were banned. By 1942, wearing a red hat in public was officially prohibited. It was treated as a political act. Adults could be punished for wearing a red hat in public, and parents could be punished if their children were caught wearing one. At that point, the hat wasn't symbolic in theory. Wearing it carried serious risk. After Norway was liberated in 1945, the hat remained a symbol of cultural survival, quiet resistance, and endurance under occupation. That history is precise. It's not abstract. And if it's something you would like to explore further, I definitely encourage you to do so. I'm going to share a link down below to the Red Hat Factory, which is a channel here on YouTube, where I gathered a lot of really interesting historical context surrounding this particular hat. I think you would find it very interesting. His whole channel is fascinating, so definitely check it out. The link is down below. In terms of why this is showing up right now, the timing matters. In recent weeks and months, immigration activity in Minnesota has been especially visible and widely discussed. That's the immediate context in which this hat has emerged. The idea is often tracked back to a yarn shop in Minnesota, and many knitters directly connect the rise of this pattern to what's been happening there, not as history, but as response. And this isn't about revisiting long-standing debates in the abstract. It's about how people are responding in this moment. For people who support the hat, the meaning is rarely just about the object itself. A lot of that support stems from the fact that this pattern functions as a fundraiser. For some, buying the pattern, even without knitting it, is a way to directly support immigrant communities in Minnesota. In that sense, the hat isn't symbolic at all. It's a mechanism for moving money where people feel that it's needed. Beyond that, many people describe knitting the hat as a way of staying engaged without burning out. Not as a replacement for action, but as something that allows them to remain connected over time, especially when the news cycle feels overwhelming. To some folks, the hat becomes a part of a larger set of responses, alongside donating, calling their representatives, or showing up when they're able. In a lot of spaces where this is being discussed, accessibility is coming up often. Not everyone can protest in public, organize, or put themselves in situations that feel physically or emotionally risky. For some people, knitting something like this hat is a way to act within the limits of their own capacity. And then there's the community aspect. Some supporters talk about the hat as a way of recognizing one another, not as a moral declaration, but as a silent signal of a shared concern in spaces that can otherwise feel isolating. Seen that way, the hat isn't elevated above other forms of action. It's simply one way people choose to show up alongside many others. At the same time, there's a real discomfort surrounding this hat, and that discomfort isn't coming from nowhere. Some critics describe the hat as performative. They argue that in practice, practice, the hat often functions less as support for affected communities and more as a signal within knitting spaces, a way of marking alignment or safety without changing much on the ground. Others point out that seeing the hat doesn't necessarily make them feel supported, especially when it's worn by people who aren't necessarily at risk. From that perspective, the visibility of the symbol can seem disconnected from realities it claims to address. Timing also plays a role in this criticism. Some people ask why this surge of attention is happening now, when this has been something that people have been talking about and living with for a long time now. From that perspective, the hats can seem a lot less like sustained solidarity and more like a moment, something people adopt when it becomes visible and move on from when attention shifts. There's also a critique around privilege. For some, it's hard to ignore that wearing a red hat can make certain people feel safe or affirmed, while others don't have the option to participate in visible protest at all. Underlying much of this is a broader question: whether symbolic action, even when well-intentioned, risks standing in for harder, less visible work, organizing, mutual aid, and long-term community support. These critiques aren't theoretical. They're rooted in frustration, fatigue, and lived experience. Zooming out from all of this, this moment fits into a much longer pattern. Knitting has often carried social meaning during wartime, in memorial work, and in moments of protest and identity building. What's different now isn't that knitting conveys messages, it's how quickly those messages circulate and how publicly they're interpreted. A simple object can suddenly feel like a statement, whether or not the maker intended it to be one. That's part of why symbols like this attract both hope and resentment. They're visible, imperfect, and often end up carrying more weight than any single object reasonably can. And for people who support it, that imperfection is part of the point. The hat isn't expected to solve anything on its own. It's a way of choosing to do something small, tangible, and within reach, when the larger situation feels hard to hold. So this red hat isn't just a pattern, it's a meeting point and a very current moment. Understanding where it comes from, why it's appeared now, and why people respond to it so differently doesn't require you to land anywhere in particular. It just helps you understand what's being talked about. And maybe that's where this is best left. Not with a verdict or a takeaway or a right answer, but with a clearer picture of what people are responding to and why this particular object has taken on so much meaning in the current moment. Because even when people don't agree on symbols, they're often responding to the same sense that something matters. And that is worth understanding.